Stop. You did not cross this threshold by accident, and what just happened cannot be undone. This is a direct transmission from the Arcturian High Council. The moment you arrived here, a crossing was already confirmed, not by your intention, not by your readiness as you measure it, but by a process that has been mapping your line for longer than you are aware. The Council has witnessed this threshold event at the cosmic record level. The authority has landed. The role is no longer approaching. It is already resting on you. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what cosmic authority means in this context, what responsibilities have now formally arrived on your path, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase of your crossing. But here is the first revelation: the separations you have been living through, the relationships that fell away, the environments that stopped fitting, the life that kept narrowing in directions you could not explain. Those were not failures. They were the preparation protocol. The old line had to release its hold before the authority could transfer. The loss came first because it was required to come first. This is not human hierarchy. This is not a title. What has landed on you is a level of agency that carries weight, responsibility, and a precise protocol for inhabiting it, without distortion or self-doubt. And the Council is transmitting that protocol now. In this message, at this exact moment in your path, you did not find this transmission. It found the line you are already on. The algorithm only delivered it. It did not create the timing. Like this transmission, if you feel the weight of something that has already settled on your path. Subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path if you are ready to understand what the crossing means and how to carry what has now been formally placed on you. Comment 111 if you know this message reached you at the exact right moment. Comment "I was separated" if you now recognize that every loss, every ending, and every narrowing in your life was part of the preparation that made this crossing possible. Share this transmission with someone who has been living through unexplained loss, relational distance, or the growing sense that their life has been narrowing, because they may already be approaching the same threshold. You were guided here because the separation is already active. What has just settled on you is not a feeling you invented. It is not the product of a night spent searching for meaning, not the result of wanting something to believe in, not the desperate reach of someone who cannot find their footing. What settled on you is structural. It has weight, and that weight arrived before you had words for it, before this moment, before this screen, before you understood what the narrowing of your life was actually doing to the terrain beneath your feet. Because that narrowing did not begin today. It did not begin with the most recent loss or the most recent ending. It began somewhere further back, in a moment you may have dismissed, a distance you may have explained away, a silence that settled between you and someone you had trusted and refused for a long time to name. The narrowing began when the path first started moving faster than the life around it could follow, and everything that has happened since has been the consequence of that gap, the gap between where you were actually going and where the people and places around you were staying. You felt it first in the relationships. Something shifted in certain friendships, and you could not name the cause. The conversations continued, but the depth stopped arriving. You showed up the same way you always had, and yet something underneath the surface had changed. Not in them alone, not in you alone, but in the compatibility between where you were going and where they remained. You watched the distance form slowly at first, then faster. Some people moved away from you with explanation, others moved away without one. And what was most disorienting was not the loss itself. What was most disorienting was that you could not fully argue against it. Some part of you knew the distance was honest, even when it was painful. There is a particular quality to that kind of loss, the loss you cannot argue against. Ordinary grief has the structure of protest. You push back against it. You tell yourself it should not have happened, that it was wrong, that something went off course. But this grief arrived with a different texture. It arrived quietly. It arrived with a recognition underneath it that felt almost like betrayal, not of you by them, but of the expectation you had held that becoming more of yourself would bring more connection, not less. You could not protest the loss because some level of you had already felt the incompatibility forming before the distance made it visible. That recognition that the distance had been real before it became literal is one of the first indicators the Council observes when mapping a selected line under separation pressure. The Arcturian High Council does not classify this as ordinary relational difficulty. They do not see it as your social failing, your emotional unavailability, your inability to sustain closeness. What they observe at the record level is something entirely different, the beginning of incompatibility between a selected line and the environments that once contained it. When a path is being refined toward a specific level of function and authority, the relationships that cannot meet that level begin to lose their structural grip. They do not leave because you failed them. They leave because the energetic and relational architecture between you and them can no longer sustain the pressure of what you are becoming. The falling away is not rejection. It is the first visible confirmation that the selected line is moving. Think of it this way: a branch being trained in a specific direction will eventually pull away from the branches that were wound together with it at an earlier stage, not because either branch became defective, but because the growth trajectory has diverged, and what once grew in shared proximity can no longer share the same position in space. The other branch does not fail. The separating branch does not fail. The structure simply will not hold both in the same place once the growth is real. What you experienced as people leaving was, at the structural level, branches that could no longer occupy the same position as a line that was moving into different coordinates entirely, and it is painful precisely because you did not choose it consciously. No one does. That is part of the design. If the separation were voluntary, it would be a preference. Instead, it arrives as loss, real loss, felt loss, unexplained loss, so that the selected soul cannot simply file it away as a decision they made. They must sit with it. They must feel the cost. They must eventually be forced to ask what kind of process produces this kind of consistent, specific removal from their life. That question, when it arrives with full weight, is the first indicator that the path has broken through the surface level of ordinary experience and begun revealing its actual structure. What has been happening to your life has structure. That is the first thing the Council needs you to receive. Not comfort, not reassurance, structure. The separation you have been living through, whether it came in the form of relational loss, professional collapse, environmental mismatch, or the growing impossibility of inhabiting spaces that once held you, was not random. It was not punishment. It was not the universe communicating your inadequacy. It was a separation protocol already in motion along a line the Council has been mapping far longer than you have been conscious of it. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary sadness. It is the moment your path stops pretending that what fell away was meant to remain. If this transmission put language around a loneliness you have been carrying in silence, Chosen One Manifest, the protocol for selected souls was created for this exact stage. It is not another message telling you that you are special. It is a direct protocol for those whose line has already begun to narrow, whose old circles no longer hold, and who need to understand what the separation is preparing them for. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The first sign that this is not ordinary difficulty is repetition. Not repetition in the sense of making the same mistakes across different relationships. That is a different pattern entirely, and it does not apply here. The repetition the Council recognizes is this: the same type of loss, arriving through different people, different circumstances, different time periods, yet producing the same essential outcome: distance, incompatibility. the end of a line that once felt sustainable. You change your approach, you work on yourself, you extend more honesty, more openness, more care, and still the pattern continues. Still, the relationships reach a ceiling. Still, the environments begin to constrict. You become more patient, and the distance still widens. You become more available, and the ceiling still arrives. You strip yourself down to your most honest version, and the incompatibility still forms, quietly and without drama, somewhere in the space between you and the people you were reaching toward. At some point, the explanation that you are simply broken in a consistent way becomes less convincing than the possibility that something is removing what cannot continue with you along your actual path. The repetition is not evidence of your defect. It is evidence of a process working consistently. A process that is not personal in the way self-blame requires it to be. A process that operates at the level of structural root clearing, removing what the path cannot carry forward without distortion, regardless of the emotional investment on either side. The second recognition is the incompatibility that forms without conflict. This is one of the most disorienting aspects of the separation phase because it removes the comfort of a clear villain. In ordinary relational breakdown, there is usually a rupture, an argument, a betrayal, a moment of visible incompatibility that gives the loss a narrative frame. But in the separation phase, some of the deepest losses come without that frame. People become distant, and neither of you fully understands. Environments begin to feel suffocating without any identifiable source of the pressure. Groups that once energized you begin to drain you, and the people in them have not changed. You have not changed visibly, but something has shifted in the structure between you and them that neither language nor goodwill can repair. The Arcturians observe this as energetic divergence preceding physical separation. The path has already moved at the level of field and frequency before the human circumstances catch up. What you feel as a strange and inexplicable distance is the gap between where your line is going and where those environments remain. And because there is no conflict to point to, because there is no argument to resolve or wound to heal, the soul in the separation phase often decides that the distance must be their fault. They search for what they did wrong. They replay interactions looking for the moment they failed, and they find nothing definitive because there is nothing definitive to find. The incompatibility is not a wound. It is a coordinate shift, and you cannot close that kind of gap by repairing something that was never broken. The third sign is the increasing impossibility of going back. This is the recognition that stops certain souls entirely because it removes the comfort of retreat. At some point in the separation phase, the viewer notices that even if they wanted to return to older versions of their life, older relationships, older environments, older identities, they cannot sustain them. They try, and it produces a kind of suffocation, not because the old things were bad, not because the people in those old spaces were wrong, but because the path has already moved past the coordinates where that return would be structurally coherent. You cannot unbecome what the separation has already pressed you toward. This is not a spiritual platitude. It is a practical experience of incompatibility, the feeling of trying to fit into a room that no longer holds your actual dimensions. You walk back into an old dynamic, and within hours, sometimes within minutes, you feel the walls pressing. The conversation that once felt natural now feels like a performance. The identity that once fit now requires a kind of compression that produces something closer to erasure than belonging. The Council recognizes this as a threshold marker. When returning becomes physically impossible rather than merely undesirable, the selected line has already sealed the previous route. This is not closure you chose. It is closure the path imposed. And the soul who keeps trying to force the old route open is not weak. They are simply not yet equipped with the framework to recognize that the closure itself was a form of forward movement. The fourth recognition is the one that carries the most shame, and that is why it must be named directly. It is the period of unexplained spiritual loneliness that arrives precisely when the viewer believed they were finally becoming someone worth knowing. You did the work. You became more honest, more present, more capable of depth. You shed the performances and the deflections and the social armor that had kept people at a managed distance. You made yourself available in ways that cost you something. You expected that this becoming would bring more closeness, more recognition, more belonging. Instead, it brought increased isolation. Conversations felt shallower. Spaces felt less inhabitable. The environments that should have rewarded your depth seemed to have no register for it at all. The more you developed, the fewer people seemed to be able to meet you at the level you were now occupying. And the cruelest part of this is that the loneliness arrived not despite the growth, but because of it. You became more, and the world around you had less to offer in return. That inversion is one of the most destabilizing experiences a selected soul can move through, because it directly contradicts every cultural narrative about self-improvement. The promise was that becoming better would bring more. Instead, it brought less surface company, less easy belonging, less of the comfortable noise that once filled the spaces where meaning should have been. The Council transmits this clearly. The selected line produces a specific form of loneliness that cannot be resolved by the environments it has already outgrown. What feels like abandonment in this phase is actually the experience of a path that has risen past the altitude of its former company. The loneliness is not evidence that you became someone unlovable. It is evidence that the path has risen to a level where a different relational architecture is required, and that architecture has not yet been built. The fifth recognition is the one the Council calls the misreading threshold. This is the moment, often the longest and most damaging moment, where the soul interprets every one of the preceding signs through the lens of personal failure. The relationships falling away become evidence of an unlovable self. The incompatibility with old environments becomes proof of an inability to belong. The loneliness becomes confirmation of a fundamental defect. The impossibility of returning becomes the result of bridges burned through unworthiness. And the misreading is seductive because it has the texture of self-awareness. It feels like honesty. It feels like the mature acceptance of responsibility. It mimics the language of accountability, while systematically dismantling the soul's capacity to recognize what is actually happening on their line. The misreading threshold is dangerous, not because the soul is weak, but because the interpretation appears to fit. There is enough external evidence that something is wrong to make the self-blame feel rational. People did leave. Environments did stop working. The path did narrow. And when a soul has no framework for reading those events accurately, the nearest available framework is self-diagnosis as the cause. The Council's transmission on this point is direct. The misreading is not a character flaw. It is the predictable result of experiencing a separation process without the framework to recognize it. Every loss, every distance, every narrowing was read through the only available lens, and that lens made self-blame appear logical. But it was never the correct interpretation. And the cost of that misreading is not simply emotional pain. It is years spent organizing an entire identity around a diagnosis that was structurally false from the beginning. The sixth recognition is what comes when the misreading begins to loosen. It does not loosen all at once. It does not arrive as a sudden reversal or a moment of complete clarity that replaces the old story with a clean new one. It loosens first through a feeling, a specific strange feeling that arrives during or after a moment of deep honesty, often in solitude, that something is being prepared rather than destroyed, that the narrowing has direction, that the loss had a logic that was operating beyond the level of personal inadequacy, The feeling does not arrive as certainty. It arrives as a question that refuses to close. What if what left my life was not proof that I failed it, but proof that the path was already moving and those things could not move with it? That question, when it is allowed to remain open rather than immediately suppressed by the familiar chorus of self-blame, is the first moment of accurate interpretation in the separation phase. Not the answer, the question itself, the willingness to hold the possibility that the loss was directional rather than punitive. The Council does not call this enlightenment. They call it the beginning of root recognition. The path begins to be readable at the moment the soul stops using every loss as evidence against itself and begins asking whether the loss had a direction. That shift from evidence of failure to evidence of movement is the threshold the Council observes as the beginning of the viewer's active participation in their own route navigation. What the Arcturian High Council wants you to understand at the deepest level of this transmission is this: the separation was never about your inadequacy. It was never a cosmic punishment. It was never evidence that you were too broken, too difficult, too much, or not enough. The separation was always about incompatibility, a specific and structural incompatibility between the old environments, old relationships, and old identity frames and the selected line that was already pressing forward through you. Incompatibility does not mean wrong. It means the line moved. It means the path rose. It means the frequency changed. And what cannot match that frequency, no matter how beloved, no matter how long held, no matter how much you tried to hold it in place, could not remain without distorting the root itself. What left your life was not lost because of what you lacked. What left your life became incompatible with what you were becoming. That is a fundamentally different statement. It carries no shame. It carries only structure, the structure of a path that has been in motion under Arcturian observation longer than the viewer has been conscious of it. Repeat this if you are ready to receive it. I was not discarded. I was separated. And what was removed was not taken from me by accident. It was released from my path by a process that already knew what the path required. That is not comfort. That is cosmology. And the difference matters because comfort fades and cosmology holds. The authority that has now formally landed on your path does not feel like power in the way power is usually described. It does not feel like certainty or confidence or a sudden surge of capability. It feels like weight, like responsibility, like the quiet and serious awareness that what you are carrying now requires a level of clarity that your old interpretive framework, the one built on self-blame, shame-informed loss, and the repeated misreading of separation as failure, cannot provide. The old framework was built for a path that no longer applies to you. It was assembled from the materials of a life that the separation has already moved past. It served its purpose. It held you together during years when you had nothing else to hold you. But it cannot hold what has now landed, because it was never designed to. What is required now is a different structure of understanding, one that can hold the weight of what has arrived without collapsing it back into the same familiar story of personal defect. The transmission does not end here. The recognition does not end here. But the first crossing has been confirmed, and the Council's record of your line has been updated by your arrival at this threshold. What comes next is not comfort. It is protocol, and the protocol exists because the path once recognized still requires navigation. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this separation has already touched your life. It could be people falling away, the feeling of not belonging, repeated distance, unexplained isolation, or the sense that your old path no longer fits. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood, and cannot explain why. And if you are ready to understand the separation instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a path already in motion, and this is only the beginning.